I'm your host, Don Loring of Wabanaki Today, and welcome to Part 4, the conclusion of the Penobscot Nation River case, with our guest, Chief Kirk Francis of the Penobscot Nation. I wonder, when we look at other states that have tribes, like New Mexico and Oklahoma and Washington, and they don't seem to have these kind of issues. They may have way years ago, but they don't now, and they all seem to get together and profit from everything.
That's the shame of it. And some of the congressional people I've talked to have raised this point. We need to really highlight and quantify what's been lost in the state of Maine through this content. What have the tribes not been able to bring to the table that has happened in other states that are not only costing tribes, but costing the state of Maine real prosperous opportunities? So, and you're right, those examples exist in a lot of places. Look, sovereign to sovereign relationships are difficult. They're tough, but when people sit down in the spirit of resolving those issues, it's proven time and time again in states like New Mexico, in states like Montana, in good states that are saying, we have concerns, but this process to deal with them, we're going to deal with those. The tribe's position is going to be respected, and we're going to find a win-win. And that's what's happened, through, so instead of fighting tribes, they might say, hey, look, we don't like gaming in this state, but we understand that you have a right to do it.
Yeah.
So how can the state benefit from that? How can we work together so that there's a state benefit, a tribal benefit through this tribal opportunity? And so, or whether it's tax-free sales, do you think Maine citizens would benefit from tax-free fuel? Instead, we worry about the implications on every other corporation or whatever it is, and I agree that some of that has to be mitigated, but you just have a mindset here that is just not open to that. And so it is hard. I travel a lot, and I go to a lot of states with tribes that are making their own decisions, that are building hospitals, clinics, that are cancer screening centers and diabetes programs, and all of these things that they are able to do from the opportunity that they have been able to create through their sovereign self-governance. And to watch all that happening in tribes all over America growing, and yet in the Northeast, Maine in particular, we're getting further and further left behind. And so it used to be, in the 60s and 70s, every tribe was poor and every tribe was oppressed and every tribe was fighting for civil rights and doing all of that. But today, there's only a handful of tribes still in that condition. Tribes have grown leaps and bounds, and unfortunately the Maine tribes are some of them.
Well, I think Maine is probably one of the only, maybe even the only tribe that's so isolated. We're just isolated from the rest of Indian country.
Well, it's funny because we're isolated too from what I found in my 4 or 5 years trying to really, within that elevated relationship with the federal government and Congress, and what I've really found is that Maine was really off the radar in a multitude of areas, So a lot of people would be like, yeah, I've been to Boston, so just understanding Maine in general has been difficult. Now people, they know some of our former senators and they know, those types of things, or I've been to Bar Harbor or whatever it is, but the Maine politics is really kept in the dark a lot, especially around these tribal issues. And so we've tried to shed light on those. We think we've done a good job with that. But at the end of the day, you're right. I think that we just get forgotten about up here. And the reality is, because even in Indian issues nationally, you get a lot of the the Western tribes get a lot of attention, due to a much more publicized existence later on. I mean, by the time, you get to Wounded Knee, the Eastern tribes, hundreds of them had been wiped out, and our population was decimated, and we had a whole host of things that have happened to us before cameras ever got turned on. And so I think that, we struggle with that as well, and all tribes back east do, but I think that we have to just continue to do that educating and keep working to try to find solutions. But it's a tough state. It's a tough state to fight these issues.
For sure, and I kind of equate it with, when you look at World War II, and they had this, Radio Free Europe. And they had it, the Radio Free Europe, because all the communications was cut off, and everything on the other side of what they call the Iron Curtain, there was no communication.
Right.
And I kind of equate Maine with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, I want to do my a new podcast show. I want to call it Radio Free Wabanaki, behind the white curtain. Because basically, that's what they're doing to us. It's a Cold War.
It is, and it's having to fight a war comes in many forms, right? And it's not guns and arrows, but it's lawyers and courtrooms and all of that, and it's so these issues have never really stopped. And one of the things about this case is really allowed me to really get into our tribe's history around this issue. And when you look at tribal leaders taking their own lives because of being deceived in treaty making processes over that river, when you see tribal leaders moving to Indian purchases to be able to fish better and being burnt out of there over military taverns, when you see all of those fights take place, people like John Neptune and a whole host of others being in the legislature and screaming about getting shoved into the ocean and removed from their territory, how do we not show that respect to those folks and our ancestors, and make sure that we're continuing to take this issue seriously and to continue to fight it? So, on the state, they don't understand that philosophy. They don't understand that approach because that's not their culture and that's not their... So you have this clash of even what people want for an end result. The state doesn't want any type of use-based issue around the Penobscot River, except for having control to determine whether they can utilize it for corporate interest or they can utilize it for, whatever it is. If it's monetary gain through their own permitting processes, whatever it is, it really boils down to control for them. Tribe's not interested in control or ownership in terms of how that's defined. What we're interested in is having control over our own future, and that's what it's about.
I think that, if the state of Maine would treat tribal people, tribal communities, like an asset rather than a commodity, or they don't even treat us like a commodity. They treat us like we're not there. We don't even exist.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing. It's like I always felt like if we could just get one poster to hang on the wall, one success story to say the tribe and the state partnered and it was hugely successful. I felt like that would build a lot of trust, and it would... I think there's just so much mistrust on both sides for different reasons. I think that they don't trust us with all this authority, is what it boils down to.
They don't trust us with any authority.
Well, that's what it is, and we don't trust them to act in good faith, and so we end up mired in this kind of rhetoric all the time about, first of all, how these processes are good and we should keep talking, and at the end of the day, you're just continuing to talk and talk and talk, and nothing gets done. And so, or they'll just flat out tell, go after you, which we're seeing in this case. But yeah, until we can hang some successes and until the tribe is respected,
No,
I don't know.
I almost think that if we're gonna get successes, we're gonna have to go from the ground up now, dealing with other organizations and companies or whatever, not the government, because they've just proven themselves to be totally untrustworthy.
And I agree. I don't think there's any future in continuing to beat our heads against that wall. And I think we've said this before, it's the definition of insanity. I mean,
Exactly.
And the textbook definition. I mean, you can't keep going back to that well. It demeans the governmental status of the tribe. It demeans our people. It marginalizes us, and we as tribal leaders have a responsibility to protect ourselves from that. And the only way to do that is don't participate in it. There is going to be much of a future relying totally on the state legislature and the governor and all of those folks.
And and I get these questions about, when is your tribal government going to send the representatives back to the legislature?
Mm-hmm.
And and my response is, no, we're not gonna.
That's it.
Why should we?
Yeah, and again, why are we going to sit down there and be treated like a political subdivision of the state, and not even to that full status, and have our elected officials be patronized, and it just makes no sense to me, and this isn't something the tribe took lightly. I mean, this is a huge part of our history being in that legislature, and I think, but the reality is, they weren't being looked at as representing sovereign nations, and how they were being treated, and you served multiple terms there, and I think that the reality is that we need a different approach, and we need to be represented in a way that's conducive to what we say we are, and we're sovereign nations. We have diplomatic representatives, and we operate on, and again, diplomacy, I think, is extremely important, and I do, and I think it works sometimes, but I think we just have to keep acting in a dignified way. We have to be structured in a way that is conducive to our continued nation-building approach, and we have to be what we say we are. And continuing to go down and compromise ourselves for another government is really not that.
Yeah, and and spending all of this money on lawyers and courts, and I mean, it could be used in such a positive way. All this time and energy and money that we put into this stuff, we could use, for our own resources.
Well, exactly. We're trying to fund and enhance youth programs. We're trying to build new facilities. We're trying to do a whole host of things that, you're right, those resources would be far better used for than continuing some petty fight about control that's going to really result in no one getting harmed. It's just ridiculous. So really, that's the problem, is that as tribal leaders and as tribal people, we have to come home from Augusta to the same environment. We come home to the people sitting in front of my desk day after day, suffering from generational poverty, suffering from historical trauma, suffering from health disparities, domestic violence disparities, a whole host of things. We try to fix that through the tools available to us, and we're blocked every time.
Yeah.
And so,
and even our stories can't get out. And this is why, a program like Wabanaki Windows and like our podcast that we're going to do is going to be so important, because it's going to get our voice directly out to people so they can understand and know what's happening behind the white curtain in the state of Maine.
well, it's exactly right. And it goes to my point earlier about the growth and intelligence of our people. I mean, just sitting here today talking the way we are with this technology and this approach, we can imagine where we're going to be in 5-10 years. We're finally starting to get avenues through things like this show and others where we can get our story out and get it out on the internet and get it out to all the folks we can get it to, including educating our own people on exactly what we're doing and where we are. And I think, it's really evidence that of the tremendous growth and opportunity the tribe has going forward to, despite what the state of Maine says or anyone else, is to continue to just be who we are and not really worry about being in that abusive relationship.
Right. So, any last parting comments?
No, I would just say that, through all this conversation, we're just going to focus on our internal processes. We're going to focus on listening to some of our best minds, and we're going to focus on moving forward, and we just appreciate all the attention that's been put on it, and also all the friends we have out there that are fighting on our behalf, and so we feel very fortunate in that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Anna Laura. I want to thank my guest, Chief Kirk Francis of the Penobscot Nation.